Hi guys, thanks for joining me today. First of all, before we jump into things, I just wanted to let our viewers get to know you guys a little bit better. Could you guys introduce yourselves, Brad and Allison?
Sure, I'm Allyson Brown, Associate Dean of Admissions for Diversity and Inclusion, and I oversee our diversity recruitment strategies in the Office of Admissions.
Awesome. Brad?
Brad Pochard, Associate Vice President for Enrollment and Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid. I've been at Furman now since 2008.
Thank you guys for joining me today. I'm really excited to get to talk about something that is really important, and that is how we sort of recruit diversity at Furman. I want to open things up with a broad question, a really big question.
Okay.
But it is, what does diversity mean to the admissions department? What is diversity and how do we prioritize it here at Furman?
Mm-hmm. Well, that is a big question to start, and I think it's something that is very important and plays an integral role in what we do here in our office. And in the world of admissions, we have multiple goals. It's a multifaceted approach to how we do our job, with many goals to craft and shape a class. Oftentimes those goals may compete with each other. They may not always align with each other, but there are a variety of goals in which we work to accomplish each and every year for each and every class. That could be academic quality, that could be diversity percentages, that could be academic preparation, head count, discount rate, all of those sorts of things, they all align. But in our world, geographic diversity, socioeconomic diversity, ethnic and racial diversity, gender balance, those are all types of things that we work to do and cultivate in our office.
Yeah, thank you. My next question is, I know that diversity hasn't always been a priority at Furman, and I know that it's become increasingly a priority over the past couple decades. I wanted to ask, you guys have been here longer than I have, so I wanted to ask, when did diversity, as we understand it today, really start becoming something that admissions was really focused on? And specifically, I wanted to see if you guys could talk about Mosaic and initiatives like it, kind of when they got started and what they do, especially for our viewers that might not understand what those things are.
Sure. I've been at Furman since 2008, and Allison has been here since 2010, so I'm over a decade, and you're right at a decade. I'm going to let you speak to this, because a lot of this is your vision and your blood, sweat, and tears. And so maybe speak to Mosaic, FDC, MAP, and others.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of the priority of working with diverse populations of students, again, in our world, it's always, how can we improve? How can we do better? What other markets do we need to be in? How can we cultivate those areas? So in admissions, the work never ends.
Yeah.
So I believe that shortly after, again, I'm just speaking to the time that I've been at Furman, since I've been here, there's been a little bit of a turn to say, hey, we're missing some populations of students that we haven't really given a whole lot of attention to before, which is right around the time of the inception of Mosaic. And that was 2011, 2012, with really how can we supplement our current ambassador team at the time, which wasn't very diverse, but again, an opportunity to grow.
Yeah.
So that's where we began to utilize our Mosaic group, and we only had probably 9 or 10 students in Mosaic at the time. We now have more than 40. So there's definitely been leaps and strides in terms of how we are presenting ourselves outwardly to families. Not only having a student group to connect prospective students and families with, but then also what does programming look like? We looked at our current slate of programs and realized we might be missing an opportunity there to really hone in on the importance of students, especially of students of color, that are wanting to connect with someone that looks like them. And then from that point, you get into other dimensions of diversity. So it kind of became a hub for students of any background that were interested in diversity at Furman to be an outlet for them. So that's where we have our Furman Diversity Connection, which is for seniors. We have a junior program that's usually offered around this time in the spring. So we've placed ourselves strategically that really just supplements everything else that we've been doing, but all in the essence of capitalizing on a new opportunity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I have plenty of friends in Mosaic, and they love it. I know that it's more than just a recruitment tool; it's also a community for a lot of our students, and I've heard great things. So.
Yeah, and I think I would add to that.
Sure.
I think maybe how this has grown and expanded during our time here. I think it's just been the intentional approach to what we're doing. I would venture to say for a long time, diversity has been a priority at Furman. It probably just looks and feels a little bit differently depending on institutional priorities, let's just call it that.
Yeah.
And I think for us, the fact that Allyson and her role, for example, Candace Chan and her role with an emphasis on international recruitment, it's become much more of an intentional focus and resourced within this office probably in the last maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years.
Yeah. That's great. That all sounds fantastic. I want to sort of dive into the nitty gritty. I know that we've been implementing a lot of stuff in admissions, but I want to ask about results, right? And that's sometimes hard for college students like myself to see because we're here for 4 years. We come and we go. You guys know this. You've been here for, like you said, almost a decade. And so let me ask how we have seen, real improvement in terms of numbers, in terms of students that are applying, diverse populations that are seeing Furman and saying, hey, I might want to go there. And then, also how that has affected overall, our overall diverse population on campus and those sort of questions. I really want to dig deep into the details on this sort of thing.
Okay, well, what I think you're asking is how we're doing.
Yeah,
okay?
exactly.
And we're in a results-driven business. We have a scorecard every year. Did we win, lose, or did we draw? And depending on who you ask, sometimes we win, sometimes we lose on the exact same class. And so again, it goes back to the competing goals and who are you trying to please, and who's proud of your class or happy with your class, and who maybe isn't. And that oftentimes is conflicting a little bit. Allyson says this to me all the time, and she said it already today. Sometimes results take a little bit of time, and we have to be patient, and sometimes we want everything right now, especially in the competitive environment that we find ourselves in higher education, recruiting, very talented students. You want results, but it takes time to see those results. I would answer your question as far as increase in demand, increase in admits, and increase in students who enroll at Furman as yes, yes, and yes. That we have seen those results. We have seen an increase in our inquiry pool, largely due to some of the programs that Allyson has already mentioned. We have seen a significant increase in the overall applicant pool, as well as in particular subsets of more diverse student populations. We have seen an increase in the students who enroll in the freshman class as well. Are we where we want to be? No. Are we happy and proud of our progress? Yes. And we're encouraged by where we're going, but it does take a little bit of time. And you reference this, you're here 4 years, you will most likely continue to be engaged in some capacity.
Hopefully, yeah.
But what you see in that 4-year period may not always be as fast as you would like it to see potentially as a student. You do have to take a little bit of a longer view to it.
Right.
And if I could add on to that, especially at a place like Furman, we on the front end are very cognizant of the experience of students. Now, it takes multiple offices on a college campus to foster the experience. So whereas the short answer to your question is yes, we've seen increases in those trends, but at the end of the day, meeting that number or even hitting a magic number is not going to immediately solve any problems or issues of the student experience. So we're always aware of that.
Yeah.
And so again, with progress and change, that can sometimes be slow, especially in higher education. And it's just a matter of seeing how what we do in an incoming class 4 years down the road, we want to be able to say, when they walk across that stage at graduation, we enjoy that part because that is the work that we do.
Right.
So not just the meeting the number and to be able to say, well, this percentage of our incoming class identified this way, but it really is overall retention and how they then become alumni and how they then, come back to help us recruit future classes. So just contextually, I have some alumni friends from those earlier years in which I was here that will still say to me, gosh, I remember being, an African American student at Furman and knowing every other Black or African American student on campus.
Right.
And now, you're talking about these other populations, and what do you mean the student doesn't know this student? How can that? How could that have grown?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So snapshot where you are as a student within 4 years. The next class of students, they're going to continue to say the same thing.
Yeah.
Why don't we have more? But we do have more.
Right.
We're growing more. every year.
Yeah, and it sounds like you guys are taking a more holistic approach, not only in terms of time, but also in the sense that it's not just about meeting a number for that incoming class, but really building a class that matches the student experience that Furman is trying to offer over 4 years and beyond.
Well, yeah, let's be honest that we can't do this on our own. We being admissions, it has to be a university-wide effort, and I think that's also something that we've been able to accomplish when you look at some of the efforts in recruiting a more diverse faculty.
Right.
When we're doing faculty searches or staff searches or different resources that have been implemented. I don't think it's any coincidence that we've been as successful as we have been while we've been as successful in creating more diverse opportunities within our faculty, particular programming within student life. If this is just an admissions tactical plan, we may be able to pull it off for 1 year, but those students aren't going to be happy. They're not going to retain, and all of those things that Allyson mentioned.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that actually gets to something we've talked about this all before, and something that you guys mentioned to me, and that I think I want to get at is that we've actually seen really significant, big increases in terms of the number of diverse students who are applying to Furman, and then also of those that get accepted. A lot of them are deciding to come. Actually, I think you guys said in higher rates than non-diverse students, for example, which I think is all great news in terms of this effort. What I would want to ask is that if we think of the admissions process in 3 steps, right? Getting people to apply, accepting them, and then getting the accepted students to come, based on the 2 things that we said are really great, then it sounds like something that might be a place where some people would point and say, okay, what's going on there is accepting students. I wanted to ask really specifically about our approach to accepting the students that apply. What do we look for? I know from just being someone who applied to Furman myself that Furman takes a really holistic approach, and then that can mean a whole bunch of different factors. I wanted to ask about how things like race and ethnic diversity, come into that. And you mentioned percentages at the beginning. What's our sort of approach to that as well? Do we have a sort of quota system in which we try to meet certain buckets of diversity? Do we take each individual application on its face, and just how do we approach this stuff? I mean, this is a really difficult question that all sorts of institutions have different answers to. So I wanted to ask, at Furman, what do we do?
Yeah. Well, I think there's about 15 questions in that question, which is fine, and I understand, and I would also follow up and say that there's a lot that happens in between applicant admit and enroll. There's a lot of other factors, and I know you realize that, but that's a very big question. And let me just kind of start big picture, and we'll kind of work our way down. We do implement a holistic review. That is a very common thing for institutions across the country like Furman, taking into account things such as strength of curriculum, core academic GPA, test score if they submit it, their essay, their leadership, their service, their recommendations. All of that comes into play. And each application is typically read at least twice. Most of them are read 3 times by 3 different readers to get all of those different perspectives. And as we work our way through the process of shaping and crafting a class, those individual reads are very important. Race and ethnicity is a data point. It's a data point that comes from the Common App. It's imported into our data system. It's certainly something that we are aware of, but it does no way, shape, or form make the decision either way for us. Certainly no quotas. That's not really how any school should operate, to be honest with you. But we ultimately are working to identify the students who can come to Furman and do the work. That's first and foremost for them to be academically successful, placing the strongest weight in the strength of curriculum and core academic GPA. COVID has made test scores very difficult this year. I know we might get into that a little bit later. But that shaping and crafting a class is kind of at the highest level, multi-read, multifaceted review, and a variety of characteristics played into.
Let me jump in and just have a quick follow-up, because I know I asked a ton of questions, so let's narrow it down.
Narrow it down. Keep going.
Yeah, I hear you. I think, based on what you said, especially weighting the strength of curriculum so highly, and which makes sense because we want students here who are going to be able to succeed in our classes, have a good experience. We don't just want to bring students in that they're going to get here and just not be happy at Furman, right? And I think that goes into the sort of holistic picture you guys were drawing earlier. It sounds like to me that having such a heavy weight on core curriculum could also potentially have an adverse effect on certain diverse populations that oftentimes don't have the privilege of going to schools, high schools, with particularly strong curriculums. I want to deal with that directly because, and I want to frame it in terms of sustainable growth. It sounds to me, and based on our previous conversation as well, that sometimes we would like to have a more diverse class. However, we don't accept students who don't meet certain curriculum standards, although that can have an adverse effect on diverse populations, because we want the diverse students that are here to be very successful. We want them to have great experiences. We want them to go back to the communities they're from and present Furman in a good light. Can you guys build on that? I mean, does that sound like the sort of thing that you guys are attempting to do? Because there's some people that I think might criticize that and say, well, we just need to get this to happen now. I mean, the alumni petition, for example, we need 12%. That's urgent. We need to have it right now. Is there a sort of more sustainable approach that you guys think you have, a more institutional approach?
Yeah, let me start here and maybe then let you kind of dive in, because these are going to be really good examples that you can provide. And this does get kind of into the details a little bit, into the weeds, and this is very much kind of inside baseball and how we operate.
Yeah.
But we have, if you were to look at, probably our number one difficult challenge that we have to face is probably the yield. And I would say that in any student population is we have quality students who we can admit, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of where they're from, that we can admit and that we can enroll our class. It becomes ultimately then who sees the value and who sees the, lack of a better term, return on investment by choosing Furman. Specifically, what I think you're asking about might be the diversity, the definition of diversity if you look at ethnic and racial diversity. There's no secret that we have under-resourced high schools across this country, and many of which reside in our home state. And we are intentionally recruiting in some of those high schools that are under-resourced, who may not have an AP curriculum or an IB curriculum that. And so what Allyson will speak to maybe just a little bit is we review within the context of the high school. So we want to see students who are taking the highest level curriculum in which they can take within their high school. They're not judged against other high schools. That does put some onus on us to ensure that in fact those students can do the work. However, a student who has taken 8 AP or 10 AP in high school A, and a student whose high school doesn't offer any AP but has taken the highest curriculum offered, they're going to grade out at the exact same way. So we never disadvantage a student due to the context of their high school.
Yeah, that makes sense. Allyson, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, just a little bit, especially with this year. We also take letters of recommendation from school counselors and teachers within their high school to also provide that context. And a lot of what we've seen this year for students who've been affected in their junior year going into their senior year by COVID, they are openly saying our school is currently operating 100% virtual. Which for us, like that's very important information because the relationships that we have with these high schools, we understand, how many APs they can take or what their curriculum looks like, or if it's a dual enrollment curriculum option at a charter high school, how that is impacting the ability of students to be able to even take those classes. So that's been helpful context too, even more so this year, but all in the essence of best understanding what they have access to. So that students are not disadvantaged. And I'm glad you went that direction so that we could provide some insight there.
Definitely.
Because yes, you would assume that there is a disparity between students who have access and that support versus those who, again, due to no fault of their own.
And that's been really core of what we have done really at Furman for a long time. Let me just give you another example of why we went test optional. So we went test optional in 2008. And
early adopter for that, right?
We were one of, very, especially for the Southeast region, very early adopter. And one of the main reasons we went test optional was the resource aspect. Not all students have the opportunity to take the ACT or SAT more than once. And certainly not all students have the ability to take some of the test prep courses that may often at times artificially inflate a test score. That, coupled with the data that we know that tests as single factors aren't the best predictor for college success
Right.
really made it a compelling story. And we talk about that a lot as you know, in test scores, there's a direct correlation between test scores and family wealth. So if you talk about diversity within socioeconomic diversity, that, you know, if you want higher test scores, your AGI of your incoming class is going to go up. It's just a direct correlation.
Right.
Right or wrong, it is what it is.
Yeah.
And so when you go back to the yield question, socioeconomic diversity is tough. You know, those students are often looking at net price and out-of-pocket cost.
Absolutely.
Geographic diversity is difficult based on, you know, location, and even with COVID, are students willing to travel?
Yeah.
Racial and ethnic diversity is does this place feel like home? Is there programming? Are there students that look like me? So in all aspects of the overall diversity and inclusion plan that we have, each certain segment has different characteristics that we work to navigate around to improve those yields.
Yeah. So it sounds like not only is diversity, like broadly speaking, one goal and a series of goals that you guys have every year. In terms of, you listed them at the beginning, you have head count, diversity, all sorts of other concerns. But also within diversity itself, there are
Correct.
tensions between geographic diversity, socioeconomic diversity, and racial and ethnic diversity.
Absolutely.
That I think we're drawing a very complex picture here, and I'm glad people are getting the sense of how difficult this is, because I think it is hard to wrap your head around. And then I think when we're myopically focused on one thing, which sometimes I think we need people to push for change and push for success in these different areas. But I think it is helpful to have a broader vision of what this really is.
Yep.
My last three questions deal with the past, present, and future. And Brad, you mentioned the schools in South Carolina, a lot of them, in South Carolina in particular, don't have the strongest high school curriculums, especially in poor areas where a lot of diverse populations tend to live. And so I wanted to ask, you know, how is Furman's been attempting to grapple with its sort of institutional responsibility in terms of slavery and racism, especially in this state, since I've been here, and probably before that as well. But especially with the Seeking Abraham Project and things like that. I wanted to ask where admissions fits into that. I know that you guys do a lot of important work trying to think about what our responsibility is and how we can amend for some of the wrongs that this institution has been a part of in the past. Can you maybe talk about some of the initiatives you guys have? I'm thinking the Joseph Fund Scholarship and things of that nature.
Sure, the Vaughn Scholarship certainly is one thing, but I would answer your question, and I'll let Allyson expand on this a little bit too, is the internal reflection that we have, as a staff, have put into place.
Right.
And that's really Allyson's initiative, and we've spoken about this. You know, we've opened up our office a little bit and provided a platform for our counseling team to really have some conversations and reflect a little bit on how we approach our jobs. But also then with diversity and inclusion being incorporated into really a key focus in everything that we do. And Allyson has done a good job of putting some things in place that have made this work. So.
Not directly connected to the synergy that's happening around the Slavery and Justice Task Force, but the Diversity Leadership Institute through Riley is what he and I we've gone through that program, which is a professional development opportunity for a variety of business leaders, you know, across the state of South Carolina. And those were just personal endeavors of just in particular for us. Yeah. And so this year has presented us with a new opportunity. It's all about opportunity for us as a staff to continuously grow and continue to reevaluate the work that we do. Yeah. So really off of last summer, our professional organization of SACAC, the Southern Association for Counselors and Admission Counselors Officers, they presented a book series discussion in which Brad very happily co-signed for us to be able to purchase and invest in the book, The Privileged Poor. And so we just essentially did our own book series reading discussion as a staff, you know, during work hours, you know, while everybody is, you know, we're working, but we're also, you know, developing as professionals so that we can continue to be aware of how we review applications and, you know, think about the work that we do from a cultural and inclusive lens.
Yeah.
Yes.
But let me address
Sure.
your question
Sure.
specifically as it relates to the Vaughn Scholarship
Yeah.
as well, because I think that's an important aspect of the overall picture that we want to ensure that everybody understands. And we're excited. This is probably now year 3 that we've been recruiting Joseph A. Vaughn scholars.
It's been expanded recently too, am I right?
It has been expanded, and it started with an investment from the institution for additional aid, and then it grew, and then we're excited for this year. So the entering class of fall 21, it'll be for 5 full tuition / full ride scholarships. So it'll be a full tuition scholarship plus additional need for students from South Carolina and some of those historical places where Furman has been throughout the state.
Right.
We're excited about that opportunity. It's being well received by our students in our high schools, and even prior to being a full ride or full tuition scholarship, it was gaining some strong momentum within our population. That's allowing us to have some really wonderful conversations, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
With students who maybe know of Furman,
Mm-hmm.
but instantly thought Furman was out of their reach.
Yeah.
There's this Furman's not for me. There's
Yeah.
no way I could attend a place
It's
like
the rich
Furman.
school.
And I think it's allowed us to break down some of those barriers a little bit and have some
Yeah.
really good conversations, both with, of course, candidates, but also then with college counselors who have the opportunity to influence who may be considering Furman, down the road.
Yeah.
And I'll just add to that, the Joseph Vaughn Scholarship is really a small mechanical piece, if you will, to I think be a signal to the work that's been done around the
Yeah.
Slavery and Justice Task Force, but then also to directly address the financial investment of
Yeah.
what it takes to go to college. So we've been able to leverage that, but again, just as a working piece in addition to our overall strategy. I think it's the best way that we can describe using the scholarship.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I want to ask now my question about the present, right? And this is about COVID-19 and how that's changed your admission strategies. One thing that I know that I've been really impressed with is that we waived the application fee this year, I believe, and we just saw a huge increase in applications, especially among diverse students. Could you guys talk about that and some of the other lessons that you all have learned from COVID-19 and what we're going to be taking forward into the future?
Sure. So COVID-19 has disrupted not just higher ed, not just Furman, but everybody.
Yeah.
Ironically, today we are in day 2 of our 4-day Duke Scholarship competition, which used to be a day and a half, but because of COVID is now expanded into 4 days. And just a current example of how COVID has impacted what we do. This incoming class will be the first class that has been entirely recruited virtually.
Yeah.
The disruption started in the spring of their junior year when they would typically be taking PSAT and ACT and SAT tests, starting their college searches and campus tours over spring break and into the summer. So they've been entirely disrupted. The first class ever. I joke with them that they shouldn't necessarily view that as a badge of honor, but they are the first class to do this. We did waive the application fee. We are up in applications, but I would challenge you in saying that the application fee is part of why we're up, but nearly not the only reason as to why we're up.
What do you mean?
It has been unbelievable what the counseling team has put into place from a virtual recruitment perspective, and again, watching the scholarship process unveil today and over the next couple of days, it's truly impressive what this group has been able to do. Just about a week and a half ago, I presented to the board our virtual strategy and more of a here's what we've done scenario. We are up in applications, but I think the bigger factor is that we've been able to generate a larger inquiry pool based on what we have put into place. So if we didn't generate the inquiry pool, there's no way you develop the applicant pool. So yes, $50 is $50, but I think that's part of it. But I think the larger influence is what we've been able to put into place from a virtual recruitment standpoint. You yourself are heavily involved in this. The way that we've been able to incorporate students into the process, I think that will carry on.
Do you think do you think having things, tours virtually, right? Like it's not cheap to come to Furman and tour. I mean, that can be a whole day off if you have working parents or something like that. I mean, it's a complicated process. Do you think virtual tours themselves, just the nature of something being online, has also helped us reach populations that we may not have before? Allyson, could you maybe speak to that?
Absolutely. And I was just going to add on to what Brad was saying. What we've seen this year is, again, just the way the chips fell to eliminate the travel piece.
Yeah.
So whereas we know that we're going to invite students 2 to 3 weeks before an event, like that's like the sweet spot to
Right.
give everybody time to travel. But then again, there's the actual travel piece. So
Mhm.
while we want to have them on campus because the campus in itself, is a big selling factor, by our virtual platform, we literally have found the sweet spot in, the timeliness of what, when a student looks at their email, registers for a visit,
Yeah.
and then actually attends, we found that sweet spot and we've leveraged it.
Yeah, that
We've
makes sense.
seen more students internationally
Mm-hmm.
literally attend these programs because now they can. There's no travel component. So that has been really interesting to see the reach in which we've been able to get to these new pockets
Mm-hmm.
from being, on virtual.
Do you guys think that's something that we'll keep in place, at least in some form or fashion?
Yeah, I think so. I think my pause is at Furman's price point and the position that we find ourselves in the market and who we compete with,
Mm-hmm.
the physical presence of students making that emotional commitment, let alone that financial commitment,
Mm-hmm.
the role of the campus visit and the presence of a student being here will no doubtedly remain important.
Of course.
What I think will change will be the way in which they get there.
Mhm.
For example, where I thought you were going with travel might be our travel.
Right.
Our 9 to 12 week fall travel.
You mean
I
the
think-
admissions counseling?
Correct.
Yeah.
Is a thing of the past. I think if and when we travel, we will travel again, but we'll travel differently, much
Mhm.
more effectively, and probably not nearly as long. We'll do it with a different purpose, because we have seen that there are some efficiencies, and to our applicant pool being up by nearly 35%, there's some things that we've done really well.
Yeah.
And there are some things that will continue as a result of COVID, and I think the inclusion of our ambassadors and our current students earlier in the process
Mm-hmm.
is one of those.
Right.
Which again, I think is a reason. Typically students, because of volume, we couldn't include our current students until students got to a point where they were here on campus.
Mhm.
But that's why the inquiry pool is up in ways in which we were able to include current students.
So what you're getting at, I think, and I'm part of the ambassadors team,
right,
so
right,
I'm familiar
yeah.
with this. I think what you're getting at is that whereas previously a lot of our admissions counselors, so the people that work for Furman, would go around the country and do high school visits. I think most students and probably parents too had college recruiters come and visit their high school. Now, since we're doing that virtually, we're actually having Furman students ambassadors tag along for those visits. And you guys think that has had a big effect on our inquiry pool, for example?
Absolutely, inquiry pool and applicant pool.
Yeah.
And I would tell you, it's changed ambassadors a little bit. You've
Mhm.
probably felt that.
Yeah.
We're asking a little bit more,
Mhm.
and I think that is something that you might even see the ambassador program evolve
Mhm.
over some of the lessons learned and some of the things that we want to continue doing.
Yeah, that makes sense. I asked a big question at the beginning. I'm going to ask a big question at the end.
Okay.
You guys take it as you will. But I wanted to ask, as you said, diversity is not some sort of number that we just reach and then we're done. It's sort of an ongoing effort. And that means that there's got to be a broader strategy. And you guys have spoken to a lot of that. But I just wanted to, in a few sentences, what is, for you guys, can you describe Furman's overall sort of approach to diversity moving forward? What are our goals? Where do we want to be in 5-10 years, and how are we going to get there? I know that's a big question. Maybe a few sentences is not
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah.
But take it away.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, let me start,
Okay.
and then I'll let you hammer it home.
Yeah, sounds good.
I like to say, and I think it's a true statement, that an enrollment plan, an admissions enrollment plan, supports the university strategic plan.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's undoubtedly that Furman wants to be more diverse in every sense of the word and in every definition. From the work that Dr. Jennings is doing as the CDO, to the research that we have been doing, to the board making recommendations to the president, and all the way down, there's no doubt that we want to be more diverse. And so our goal is to do our part and make that happen. And that is a partnership that we are forming with our partners and constituents across campus to help make that work. Again, we can't do it on our own.
Right.
So I instantly think about academics, and I instantly think about student life and how we partner with them to essentially promote the programs that we've put into place. And so 5 to 10 years down the road, I would like to think we'd have additional programming, additional support, additional resources, building upon the progress that we've made, that allow us to continue to grow in demand and ultimately enroll students who are going to make Furman a much more diverse and happy, supported place.
Yeah. Allyson?
Yeah, so I'll just add to that, when you talk about, the goals within 5 years, 10 years down the road, I believe as an institution, the goal there is inclusivity.
Mm-hmm.
So, building a diverse community, again, can be relatively easy to do, but the inclusivity part is the opportunity to really foster, change and really impact a college campus. So I would fair to say anybody from any functional area on campus would like to see, inclusive efforts in play. What are the best practices?
Yeah,
Yes.
well, let me ask you. I think that sometimes we throw around terms like diversity, which we really exercised, and then we're jumping in this whole inclusivity thing. But I want to get a really, what does that mean to us in admissions, and I guess to you as someone who's worked for this sort of thing for a long time now. What would that look like in Furman?
Yeah, so diversity is really just the difference within an environment.
Sure.
But the inclusion piece is how each of those different pieces ultimately work together, which is what the real world, the workplace, looks like. So fostering a diverse community is doable.
Right.
But the inclusion efforts so that education and knowledge exchange can actually take place has to be inclusion. You can have X number of students of color or students or fill in the blank,
Right.
but if those students of color and the majority at large are not being inclusive and respective of each other, like that's where you suffer. So when I say inclusive, that's essentially what I mean.
Yeah.
And just to do a little bit more bragging about what we've been doing. This year has really just opened up a whole, it's just a new chapter for us. So when we are in a position to have regular campus visits and tours and travel like we used to, I think we'll be better prepared not only as a counseling team in terms of educating ourselves, but we now have the travel brochure printed in Braille. There's 10 copies ready to go for students and families who might need that accommodation. So we're just being more proactive. In a Zoom world, you're bound to miss some students who might have certain accommodations.
Sure.
So we've been able to pivot.
And yield offerings in Spanish.
Yeah.
For students who might have parents where English isn't the first language in the home. As we become more diverse, even in our inquiry pool and our applicant pool, resources like that are important.
Yeah.
And then as you yield more, you have to ensure that the campus is ready, that Furman is ready to actually be more diverse, because it puts some onus on us and some ownership on us as an institution to provide a quality experience.
Yeah, it sounds like admissions and campus really have to be on the same page about our overall goals, and that it sounds like that we're at a place where, especially this year, something about the disruption really helped us coalesce around certain goals, and that moving forward we're going to be in a really good position.
I think it's starting to be much more visible right now, but the work actually started maybe 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think that culmination of work and prep and planning and development is now at a point where we're implementing and seeing the results.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure to get to talk to you about something that I've been involved with and that you guys have been involved with for a lot longer. So I hope our viewers learn a lot from this, and I do really appreciate you guys joining us today.
Appreciate it. Thanks,
Thank
Evan.
you.